Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New View podcast. My name is Mac.
And my name is Megan.
Come along with us as we dive into the world of competitive Irish dancing and beyond,
sharing perspectives, developing community, and learning from each other.
We hope you enjoy. Okay, well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of New View. I truly could not be more excited to introduce to you today's guest, Savannah Robinson. Savannah is currently still training and competing in dancing, but in addition to that, Savannah has also graduated with a master's in sport performance and exercise physiology, throughout which she did some really, really interesting research relevant to competitive dancers, and Megan and I are both super excited to get to chat about this a little bit more today. But since finishing that master's program, Savannah has been working with Target Training as a program planner for both mental and physical training for dancers. And in addition to all of that, Savannah is still planning on applying for doctoral programs in the near future. So I think based on that intro, it's safe to assume Savannah has a lot of valuable information to share with the dance community. And we're just so excited to get into this conversation. But before we dive into the maybe more academic side of things, Savannah, would you mind just telling us a little bit about your background in Irish dancing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me on. I'm so excited. So a little bit about my experience with dance. I danced for the Cleary School in Los Angeles, California. I started there when I was 7 years old. And before that, my parents had put me into other types of dance, but this was really the first thing that I was like, I really want to do this. And my poor parents had no idea what we were getting into. I absolutely fell in love with it, and I've always enjoyed the actual activity of dancing, the jumping, kicking, the technical skills. But then as I've grown and developed in dance, I think that love has just gotten more and more intense. The community we have at Cleary is so amazing, and Maggie and Katie do such a great job of bringing us all together. My best friends are at Cleary, and then I personally just really love the goal setting part of dancing. So being able to just give my maximum effort to something and see that pay off in that improvement. And you know yourselves, when you've given your all out on stage and there's nothing else left in you, but you push that extra little bit and find something you didn't know was there. And that's just such a addicting and amazing experience. And so I'm just really grateful for my experiences so far in dance, and I'm excited to continue working even harder to make even more amazing ones.
That's so awesome. What a good career, and what awesome things to highlight. It sounds like you're extremely process oriented, which I think can be kind of difficult in a competitive dance setting where there is the opportunity to achieve such cool external goals. Maybe those more competitive result-based goals that are really great and cool to strive for, but it sounds like you're very process oriented and just in love with the actual I guess training and curiosity of discovering your own potential in dancing, which is pretty amazing to develop that over the course of a dance career.
Well, thank you. To my dancers, I always encourage them. People will say, don't have a numeric goal. And I'm always like, no, it's really important to have both, right? Because the numeric goal is what's going to drive you to wake up in those early mornings, put in that extra little bit of effort. But then at the same time, you want to be going in with that controllable goal. So thinking that your goal for the major is actually to give your maximum effort, because that's what's ultimately in your control. And then, so I think it's really important to kind of have both perspectives as you navigate your dance journey. And that's something I'm definitely still working on, but I encourage that as a perspective.
Savannah, that's so funny. I'm staring at Mac as we're talking because we were just talking about this with some dancers less than a week ago. And it's so relevant, and I think you're totally right. That's what gets you up in the morning, those kind of more placement or achievement based goals, but the process goals keep you loving it and fulfilled. I'm just curious too. I have to know because I've gotten this perception from you that you're bubbly sunshine. And I love that. But that you just really have this special energy for dancing, and it kind of seems like life in general. And I'm wondering if that's something that was just like innate when you kind of found dancing, or you kind of developed, or it's a mix of both. And I think it would be interesting for other dancers to hear about, because I think it's something maybe we don't talk about, but that dancers really have a lot of like energy and spirit for dancing, or they kind of find it within themselves. And you seem to be like perfect poster child for that. So I'm curious.
Oh, well, that's very, very sweet. I really appreciate that. I think that I was always a really enthusiastic child. Like you'll hear in my like academic stuff when I do something, I'm like all in. And so I get really passionate and excited about what I'm doing, and dance is just something I care about and I love so much. And I think it's natural, right, when you pour so much work and effort into something, to feel that connection and feel that like love for it. But I don't want to like create this like false illusion. I have had a lot of injuries over my career as well, and that's been a really challenging experience to go through. So I think sometimes that passion and that bubbliness is something that I've had to develop in some ways, just in order to keep driving forward, right? You have to keep that love for dance going because you are experiencing, right, those challenges. So being able to find your intrinsic love of dance, and yes, like hold on to those competitive like goals, but then being able to keep that positive attitude, I think, is something that I really try to also build within myself, regardless of like the intrinsic love I have for dance. I hope that answered your
Yeah.
question. Sorry.
No, I think that's an awesome answer. And I think it brings up kind of just circling back to that point of I'd say we're all the three of us in agreement on it's really beautiful and useful and amazing to have these extrinsic, we'll call, results, number, goals, or whatever. But it really is walking that fine line of how do I balance, and I think that's something I struggled with a lot. How do I balance? Having these external goals that are somewhat out of my control, while also, maintaining that true, genuine, authentic, just love for the process. And I think you bring up another amazing point, and something a lot of dancers can relate to is, you know, what does happen when a challenge comes up, for example, like an injury, where now you're sidelined and those external goals seem so far off, and your ability to live out kind of your identity as a dancer and make, progress in your life and have those tangible, I guess, markers of feedback that is just hugely challenging, I think, for even very mature athletes and especially younger athletes. And I think just listening to you talk about your experience, it sounds like that inherent enthusiasm that you have has been something maybe you've consciously used to your advantage as a, I guess, a strength to cope with some of these challenges over time. And it's definitely an inspiration. So I would love
Oh,
to get inside your brain as well in terms of just how you've managed to stay positive through those challenging times. I'm guessing your community has also been really beneficial in helping manage that.
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think that I would have the relationship that I have with dance and being able to come back from some of the injuries I've had in the past without my community, right? Because, like, me being bubbly and enthusiastic, that's like a reflection of the people around me and the community that I'm within. So, like I talked about, Maggie and Katie, my dance teachers, we're so close knit at Cleary, and we're really a big like teams and solos school. So our goal is to work hard, give our maximum effort, but like together, right? We have a thing where we're always like, do it for the team, even in our solos, right? So any solo result that we have, that builds up the team, and you're doing it for those around you as well as yourself. And so that I think has been so helpful. My parents are so, so supportive. They're amazing. So just everyone in my life is so incredibly supportive and helpful, and they like really allow me to keep pursuing these goals and foster that positivity because you have that security net of being like, I know I'll have people to support me going forward. So having them in my corner is just amazing.
It's like a reflection of your community, you know, like your attitude and positivity and like that energy. I think that's something I haven't necessarily thought about, but you know, what you're able to give in life and in practice or like on stage, no matter how you're presenting your positivity and love for your thing, it's really influenced by those around you and who's making it such a positive experience when maybe you yourself aren't in a position to necessarily like be really in tune with your intrinsic motivators. So I think that's a cool concept and we have so much to talk about, but I could just talk about that the whole time.
I know. I think just to double click on one little thing. I love that you guys do so much teams and Kaylee's too. I feel like I was really fortunate to just kind of get that at the end, like the tail end of my career. And I know what you mean in the sense of it's so awesome to do your solos, and that's really cool that at your school you frame it, even your solos, as like do it for the team. And I think that's so beneficial for dancers to feel part of something bigger than just themselves. But there really is something about standing in an eight hand and like, when you all just know the same counts and you just take hands and you catch hands with your partner just at the right time and you just lock eyes with the person across from you at that certain count or whatever it is. There's something really, really magical about that in Kaylee dancing. Um, and there's so many different ways to experience connection in Irish dancing. I just am a big fan of do Kaylee's even if it's just for fun because it provides such a cool opportunity for that magic like connection and synergy. I think that sometimes can get lost if we only ever do solos or only ever are in like that very competition focused mindset. Just
Yeah.
really
Yeah, totally. I definitely agree. Like I said, it's like such a huge component of our program. And even like growing up in the school, like you start out being put on teams before you're really doing solos competitively typically. So you're competing teams and then you start competing solos. And I think it really helps develop that like intrinsic motivation to do the solos, but also with a background and a base level of like that community. So yeah, I definitely agree on Kaylee's are awesome. I love all of it.
that's so, so interesting. I mean, okay, we definitely want to talk about your research but now I'm just like, whoa, that could be such an interesting study is kind of looking at different mindsets of dancers who've grown up in different sort of contexts, whether your control is, ta like Kaylee's versus not Kaylee's or whatever, but I don't know, it just would be a fascinating little rabbit hole to go down. But anyways, we really do want to talk about your research a little bit more too. So I'll let you introduce and explain your topic because clearly you're the expert on it. But as far as my understanding, your research was on, the development of mental toughness and its correlation to flow state in elite dancers. So first of all, how did the idea for that topic come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like going into school, like I talked about at the beginning, I always kind of like to go all in on things. So when I was in undergrad, I wanted to do a thesis as my like end cap of undergrad, and that was really unusual, right? No one was kind of doing that. And so I ended up like cold emailing basically all the professors like in my department being like someone mentor me. And thankfully someone did. They had faith in me. And so in my research in undergrad, I didn't actually focus on mental toughness and I didn't specifically focus on dancers. But then in that research, I found the concept of mental toughness, right? And I was reading about it and I was like, oh, this I really relate to, right? It's something that I see in dancers. It's something that I feel like has helped me bounce back from injuries and just like be successful in terms of like being able to push through my training and give my all. So it's kind of all wrapped up in one package. Because for those of you that are unfamiliar with mental toughness, it's someone's capacity to be able to maintain like control, focus, determination in the face of obstacles and still have their maximum best output. right? So your optimal effort. And so that was definitely something I was like, oh, the dance community, this is what it is about, like this is so important for training. And as I was looking into it, there was like no research on it in dancers. And in general, in sports psychology, there's not a lot of research on dancers. It's mostly about super important topics, but it's mostly about body image or eating disorders or injury recovery. Those are kind of the three topics that people talk about in terms of dancers. But then that's all really like addressing problems that people are seeing in the community. It's not actually really about helping dancers to dance better or like reach their performance goals, right? So I was like, there's this big gap in research that I'm seeing. And so going into my master's program, I already like knew what I wanted to talk about. Or wanted to base my thesis on. I wrote it in my personal statement. I was like, I want to focus on mental toughness in elite dancers. And I'm sure going in there, like, sure, you're going to like change your mind. But I'm obviously like, am still competing. And so I was having those experiences in dance. And that's just like so inspiring to want to help and give back to that community as well. So that's kind of what drove my research forward. And as you talked about, I ended up focusing on mental toughness and how that develops in elite dancing populations, and then also how that correlates to flow states. So being able to reach an optimal performance state. So that's kind of how I ended up on that path.
Wow. I'm like just sitting here, one, thinking about myself and my own interest in research and like, ooh, like, how can I learn more about what you've done and like keep doing more? Because I think that's just such an interesting, amazing topic. And Mac and I could sit here and talk to you for like the rest of the day. I know that. My biggest question or thing I want to learn more about from you, will you tell us like about your participants in your
Yeah.
research? I'm like so eager to learn about that because I think, well, one, being in dance yourself, you've got access to people to do this, but I want to hear all about that. Will you tell us about your participants?
Yeah, absolutely. So in research, my like favorite parts of research are like the conceptualization and then being able to analyze. And like I love writing, so writing up all the outcome. My least favorite part is data collection. Just because it is the only thing basically in research that no matter how much you prepare, it's not in your control. Right. And ultimately, you're sending out this survey. So that's what I ended up doing. It was an online survey. And you're sending it to so many people. Like, I was Instagram DMing dance, like famous dancers to be like, please fill out this survey. Please give it. I was DMing ballet academies. Right. And I was talking to like Target Training and other dance programs and people who had like a wide reach in dance communities. So I had access to more like Irish dancers. So my study is, I think it's like 43% Irish dancers. But then there was also a demographic that was like ballet, contemporary, because I just wanted to focus on elite dancers kind of as a whole. Because it is so hard to get participants in general. So I didn't want to narrow it even more. So I ended up getting competitive dancers, professional dancers, or individuals majoring in dance. That was kind of my cutoff for who was able to participate. And obviously they had to be 18 years of age. But that in general was what I was looking for. And so it was you dedicate basically one semester to data collection. So that whole semester, I'm like sending out email after email, DM after DM, trying to get people back. And it ended up being it was predominantly white and predominantly female population that I ended up being able to get back, and also predominantly, as I said, Irish dancers and competitive dancers specifically. So there was a smaller percentage, I think like 19%, that were professional dancers, and then an even smaller percentage that just majored in dance. So that ended up being the participants that I was able to gather. And yeah, like I said, that's kind of the hardest part for me, was waiting and trying to get those participants back. But I was so grateful for everyone that filled out that survey, because it's kind of long. Because when I got that population, because there's not that much existing research on that group, I really wanted to ask as many questions as kind of possible in order to get as much data back. So I was so thankful that people even filled it out.
Oh my gosh. Well, I would love to still fill it out at some point just for fun.
Yes, please.
That'd be super cool. Uh, okay, so participants, that's so awesome. I think it's really cool, and it does, I guess, make sense that you got a lot of Irish dancers, given that's your community and where you have a lot of connections. And I guess there's probably advantages and disadvantages to having kind of a more, I guess, diverse participant population in that. Like it's really cool to see different experiences, and maybe I'm really curious to hear how that played out in the analysis, like if there were differences that you noticed. Would you ever want to almost like reconduct even the same study, but try to only do it with competitive Irish dancers?
Absolutely. I mean, ideally, that's what I like wanted going in, because obviously that's like my experience. And I also think, as you're talking about differences, an interesting difference that it didn't necessarily impact the mental toughness side, but more the flow state, is that a lot of other types of dance, it's about emoting. And Irish dance, we don't do that, right? We're not telling a story unless you're doing a dance drama. And so Irish dancers tend to be a little bit less familiar with flow state, because they have to think about so many technical notes typically, and aren't trying to like emote an emotion. So other dancers were talking about like, oh, my ability to demonstrate a character or tell a story. And Irish dancers were like, when I run stamina, this is what happens, right? It was not so much about like displaying emotion on stage. So I think that while this was a helpful study to see overall, there are definitely so many differences between types of dancing.
That is so interesting. That is so interesting. So it's almost kind of like what you were finding was that being able to lose yourself in a character almost in those other forms of dance was conducive to flow state. Whereas in Irish dancing, it's potentially a lot easier to, I don't know, get caught up and have the technical side almost be a barrier to tapping into that flow state in a way. Wow. Well, even that in and of itself as a discovery is so useful in that now we know a little bit more like, okay, maybe it's this over focus almost on the technical side of things at a certain point that's not actually beneficial to your performance anymore. Clearly we have to think about those things to a point, but then there's maybe sort of a drop off as to where focusing on the technical side of things is not actually beneficial anymore to the overall performance. Wow, that's just so cool.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because I feel like that is an experience that dancers have, but they don't necessarily register, right? Because the whole idea of practice is to give you muscle memory, right? It's to make things automatic. So then getting out on stage, if you're, let's say, a little bit less practice, you're going to be thinking more about, okay, what do I need to hit at these specific areas? More of your notes aren't already existing in your legs and in your muscle memory. So by practicing more, we're actually giving ourselves the capacity to get into flow state easier because we're making more things automatic.
Wow. Okay, like considering all of that, can you kind of talk us through the wide range of results and then also share like, okay, what do we do with all this information? Because I feel like now we're talking about it and I'm sure listeners are like, okay, but like, how do I get better at this,
Yeah, absolutely. So as we talked about, I kind of looked at two main questions. So first of all, I looked at how does mental toughness develop, right? Because like you're saying, I'm so big on, is it actionable, right? Like it's not helpful for us to just be like, oh, you should have more of this if you can't build it, right? Then you're saying you just wake up and you're like, oh, I have this amount of mental toughness today, right? And that's what we're working with. That's not helpful for anyone. So in this study, we were looking at ways it develops. So we found by analyzing participants' responses that there were a lot of similarities between how it develops in dance and how it develops in other competitive sports. So even like non-dance, right? Rugby, ice skating, all of those. And so the main outcomes that we found were that overcoming setbacks was a way that people found mental toughness to develop. So these could have been injuries, disappointments, so being able to be persistent in spite of that. Having high standards was another one. So being able to stick to giving your maximum effort regardless of the situation. And going into that was actually the theme that I was least surprised to find, but actually the girl who was helping me analyze my themes, who was not a dancer, was probably most surprised to find, was repetition of hard things was talked about so frequently. So dancers specifically would talk about stamina in a lot of their responses. So training stamina, but also being able to stick to a routine, right? I get up at 5 a.m., I work out, I go to practice like 6 days a week, and 7 days a week, I'm doing something to push me towards my goals, right? I'm doing my training. So being able to stick to that schedule. They also found that found that passion was very impactful. So feeling passionate about dance and having that motivation kept people persistent, and so thus built their mental toughness and helped them show up more mentally tough the more that they kind of loved dance and what they were doing. And then it was also interesting because dancers and athletes both talked about support, right? The community that you're in and how having that safety net allows them to be more persistent and have that mental toughness. I know I'm talking a lot about this finding, but what I thought was really interesting was those were all ways that dancers responded similarly to athletes. But we also asked about the culture of dance and how they felt that impacted their mental toughness development. And so they talked about culturally specific ways. And we found 2 that dancers talked about helping their mental toughness. And then we found 2 that they said hindered their mental toughness. And these were unique to dancers, like they weren't represented in other literature. So the 2 that helped was team support, which actually was distinct from the support that they talked about before, because dancers were talking specifically about their team, right? Their school that they were dancing for, whether it was actually dancing Kaylee's or just those around them, right? Their teachers and the team that had kind of built. They were talking about that as helping their mental toughness. Another way that dancers had helped them was being able to translate skills that they learned in dance to outside of dance. So saying like work ethic, resilience, persistence, maximization of effort, seeing those things translate outside of dance, they felt that they were able to be more mentally tough in general, like over their whole life, which I thought was interesting because that's something I think that dancers talk about a lot is translating skills outside of dance, and it's not very well represented in other sports. So that was interesting to me. And then the ways that it kind of was hindered, right? Mental toughness was negatively impacted by the culture was through the production of insecurities. So like weight analysis and feeling insecure in your body and like comments being made on that was a large component that they felt wore down their mental toughness over time. And similarly, the evaluation of dance is subjective, right? Whereas in rugby or in running, it's like who crosses the finish line first, who's in the end zone first. But in dance, it's your hard work translates to your improvement, but that doesn't always translate to your result. And so that over time wore down on individuals' mental toughness, or that's what they perceived. So that was so much talking, but that was on the first kind of question that we covered and that we looked at with dancers. And then our second question of whether that mental toughness then impacted flow states. The short answer is yes, it did. So we found through quantitative data, so through numbers, right? That's the easy way to explain it, that there was a correlation between those two things. But on the face of that, that's not super helpful, right? I really wanted to make sure this research was as applicable as possible. So I was like, okay, we know it impacts mental toughness impacts performance, but we don't know how, right? That's not helpful to, again, just know that it does. And so we talked to dancers in our open-ended questions about how they felt mental toughness had that relationship. And they said it was through resilience, confidence, and then also through, oh my gosh, I'm pulling up my notes, through focus. So this was interesting because individuals talked about how they were unable to reach flow. And that was through like situational disruptors, like the music going weird or slippery stage, right? And focus helps you overcome that, right? Being able to maintain focus despite that. They also talked about a perceived lack of preparation, right? Not that they weren't prepared, but that they didn't feel prepared. And confidence contrasts that, right? So that's the way mental toughness then helps you reach flow. And then finally, they talked about criticism and pain and injury. And resilience helps you to take on notes, but not take them personally and translate them into action. And it also helps you overcome pain and injury. So those were kind of the different routes, resilience, confidence, and focus, that you were able to see mental toughness actually impacting how dancers were able to reach flow. So I'm sorry that was so wordy. We found a lot of interesting things, but that was the general answer to our two research questions that we had.
That's
Oh my
so
goodness.
fascinating.
Would you say then, if I can ask you more questions, I'm just
Please.
curious then, when it comes to translating that into advice you might give dancers or saying, okay, how do we take what I learned from my research and like make some actionable items? Would you say the biggest thing to do then is to develop those three skills you touched on, resilience, confidence, and focus? Would that be the best thing you can do to produce both mental toughness and flow? Or I don't know, how would you
Yeah.
translate that into just advice, when you're working
Yeah,
with dancers?
absolutely. So you can definitely go through that route, right? Like confidence, focus, resilience, that's all a part of mental toughness. So you can build up those skills and that will build up dancers' mental toughness. But through my study, because we focused on the development of mental toughness, we were able to find even more like kind of direct pathways. So we talked about like repetition of hard skills and being able to push yourself and give your maximum effort, hold yourself to that high standard. So being able to foster environments and cultures that allow dancers to do that. So push through hard things, give their maximum effort, but then also be able to overcome those challenges, because we talked about confidence and love of dance being so interconnected with mental toughness. So being able to create environments where dancers are giving their maximum effort, thinking about, oh, when you push through stamina, right, you are giving your maximum effort, you're pushing really hard, but the key component is being able to overcome that challenge so that when you look back on it later, you see it as a source of confidence, right? You see it as your capability shining through. So being able to create those environments where dancers are challenged, but then also able to build up that confidence, right? Because we talked about issues that tear down mental toughness. A lot of them have to do with bringing down that confidence and that self-belief. So creating environments and supporting dancers in a way that allows them to have those like intense, giving their all moments, but at the same time also feel supported and like they have, we've talked about a lot, like that safety net that they can persist in order to reach their goals because they know that they love dance. They know that they have that support system. So it's kind of like a full package that you want to create for these dancers, but it's really an interesting perspective, especially as a dancer myself, to take on the training that I'm putting in and as a sports psychologist working with young dancers and trying to foster mental toughness in them. So trying to make this actionable for them as well.
Savannah, I mean, we could keep talking about this forever. I'm hearing you say like maybe a good exercise dancers or teachers, anyone listening to this could start with things like, maybe working on stamina drills and giving it their absolute best as they do it, and then taking some time to like reflect after and say, okay, what were my like concrete wins from that? What did I do really well? Maybe I like kind of died and felt terrible at the end because I'm pushing myself really hard, but I noticed that like my feet were really turned out from start to finish. I gave 100% effort. I might be tired now, but I did my very best. And then reflecting on that, either like with other dancers that you did it with, or with a teacher who was watching, or even a parent. I mean, I know that's not necessarily the like perfect scientific route to doing that, but that could be an actionable way for some dancers to like take what we're talking about today, like learn from your research and say, okay, I'm gonna like work on this a little bit. I want to develop these skills. And I think kind of keeping a log of wins and then things to keep working on, not in a form of like ridicule per se, or really get down on themselves about, but say, okay, these are things I'm going to keep working on because I'm inspired, I'm noticing progress, and these are like amazing wins I'm having. I think as you're talking, that's what I'm hearing is like some real actionable like takeaways. Not only you can get from the research, but from just dancing, and developing these skills that you're talking about. Because I know that, the three of us love to talk about research, but not everyone's like coming from that
Yeah.
perspective, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that you really nicely summarized like one really concrete way that you can kind of translate that into action. And I think a lot of times where dancers fall through on that approach is kind of what you talked about, where your automatic first thought, right, is, well, nothing went right because I was like so tired at the end, right? Like it was horrible, like my stamina was terrible. But the contrast to that is that mental toughness isn't about doing your best when everything is like super awesome and great. Like that's just you living your life, right? Mental toughness is about pushing through when things are hard and not going to plan. So kind of contrasting that kind of perfectionist mindset of, okay, everything needs to be perfect all the time, instead seeing it as such a win when you push through when things are hard because you're building that skill. And just to add one more thing onto that, because you're talking about not everyone is into research and everyone's like, well, how do I actually like change this? What I end up doing with the athletes that I work with as kind of an exercise to help them start building mental toughness is I have them fill out this worksheet that asks them who the most mentally tough person they know is and what characteristics do they display, right? Because if we're thinking about someone else, the characteristics are going to be actions, right? It's going to be like they push through their stamina. They look really positive when they do it, even if it's like another person or a character from a book. I've had students choose that as well, where they're like, oh, Percy Jackson really fights through and like supports his friends when times are tough, right? Those characteristics that you can observe, then you start taking those on and trying to show up with those characteristics in your challenging times and to your training. So it makes it a little bit more manageable and actionable. So instead of thinking like, oh, there's this vague concept of mental toughness, I really hope I'm mentally tough today. Instead thinking like, okay, this person, when they're mentally tough, they show up and they always give their maximum effort. They wake up 10 minutes earlier to do their stretching, right? They have actual actions you can follow through on. And so it makes it more, like I said, actionable. And so being able to show up as mentally tough becomes something you can do and not just something you're like thinking about.
Yeah, I'm even thinking back to just a podcast I was listening to myself recently. And, I think sometimes when we think about mental toughness, it's like, oh, you think to like the most challenging moments, like you're in the midst of an injury or like the hardest stamina or whatever it might be. And absolutely, those are moments when mental toughness needs to show up. But I think it almost can be this like little bit of a shift in your everyday thinking is it can be the small things too, like pick the hard thing. That was the theme sort of of this podcast that I was listening to. And it's like, you know, choose the hard thing in the morning of you get out of your bed and it would be easier to just not make your bed and to just whatever, go downstairs and have breakfast. But it's like, okay, that was an opportunity. I could choose the maybe slightly more the option with a little bit more friction of, oh, okay, like I'm gonna make my bed. And that's like one drop in the bucket of you fulfilling that identity of being somebody who's mentally tough, right? And then, hopefully that thought is somewhere in the back of your mind, and then that influences the next decision you make. And I really have to credit my dancing teacher for this. I remember I don't know, I was 14 maybe, and my dancing teacher was like, she's like, you need to do this certain stamina drill 5 days a week, 6 days a week maybe. And, I don't want to be the proponent of, oh, just slam through your stamina for the sake of slamming through it. But in some ways, that really was instilled in me. And I'm not saying I'm the most mentally tough person, but I do think that was something that contributed to the mental toughness I do have. It was like, no, I have to do this for the sake of doing it a little bit and just the satisfaction in getting it done. And like exactly what you guys were both saying is looking back and going, yeah, okay, that maybe wasn't the most beautiful treble jig I've ever done, but like I did it and I proved to myself that it is within me to overcome discomfort and pain a little bit and whatever it might be. I do think that this is something that was super coming up in my mind as you were explaining all that, Savannah, is it is an interesting thing about competitive Irish dancing in that it even goes back to like very basic psychological principles, right? It's like, does this behavior get rewarded? Right. And like that, the likelihood that I'm going to do it again. And that's a thing about Irish dancing is if you're only thinking about the reward of a competitive result, you're probably not going to get rewarded directly. It's not going to be a direct correlation to your behaviors every time. Like sometimes your hard work and overcoming challenge and whatever, all those things will lead to the first place trophy. And sometimes it won't. So I think that that's like maybe an added challenge and just like a really interesting thing to consider in the context of competitive Irish dancing. It's like we really do need to exactly what you were saying is create these environments where like we ourselves as dancers can kind of have that recognition of the correlation between, okay, me choosing the adversity or me like choosing to show up in a certain way through challenge is beneficial. And, that's great. The trophy's great. And I'm honoring that I'm still working for that in some regard, but that's not the only thing that like the behavior is contingent on, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm getting really weird in my connecting of my dots, but just these are just thoughts popping up for me. It's like, oh, that subjective nature coming back in, adding that extra layer that we have to deal with. But yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I think mental toughness research in dance is so important because it is such a different environment in a lot of ways. So a lot of past researchers, I feel like were thinking, oh, like I'm going to look at the dugouts, I'm going to look at the fields for these mentally tough players. But really, if you think about being able to persist through those disappointments when it's not necessarily your effort that was the crux of the issue. Like it's not that which diverted the result. Sometimes like it's a learning opportunity too. What can you change? What can you add? But also in those times, that really is mental toughness in a lot of ways, is coming back to something you love so much and continuing to give your maximum effort for that end goal. But in spite of, yeah, that cultural part of dance where it's also subjectively scored.
totally. Well, yeah, I think you're so right. That is an opportunity in and of itself. And like choosing to still come back to those mentally tough behaviors, even when it's not rewarded, I would imagine, I'm pretty sure it does like strengthen it even more, right? Just such fascinating stuff. I guess one question to maybe wrap things up a little bit on, and yeah, Megan and I could probably talk to you forever, but maybe nobody wants
And
to
I
listen
would love it.
that long.
Just me,
Um,
I'll listen.
But where do you see research needing to go, or what might your future research interests with this be next?
Yeah, there's so much, right? There, even because this was really filling a void in research, there were so many jumping off points, right, from it, because like the connection we established between mental toughness and flow, that was just correlation, right? There's no like causal relationship. So I think a big component that I would want to continue looking into is whether we can establish like a direct building mental toughness impacts performance causationally. And that's something I'm kind of working on. I have a supervisor that I'm working with from my graduate program, and the programs that I run with target training, mental toughness is one of our like aims to try and build in dancers. And so I take data, I ask dancers to fill out a survey at the beginning and the end, and kind of see if the things that I'm doing and working on with dancers help build that mental toughness over their season. And obviously there's a lot of factors that I can't control in that, right? Like they're going to get stronger. They're going to hopefully be giving their maximum effort, pushing hard in class. So that's going to build their mental toughness. But just trying to see whether there's some kind of causal connection there that I can observe. And so I've been looking into that in my work so far. So that's been really interesting. And also kind of what you were talking about, where like picking the harder option, doing that consistently, creating that identity for yourself, because that's really the end goal, is to not just think, okay, how can I act mentally tough? It's I'm a mentally tough person, so it's not even a question of what I'm going to do. And being able to really kind of have that shift for dancers, and when does that shift from it being something I do to something I am really happen? I think that would be so interesting to research and look into. So that's what I am interested in, and I am continuing to experience like as a dancer, as a coach, as a researcher. So it's just all a fascinating topic that I would love to talk forever about.
This is so fun. I love this as someone who enjoys research, so this is fun for me, if no one else. But I imagine people are going to get quite a lot out of this, and like on behalf of Mac and I, like we can't thank you enough for coming on today, and I can say without a doubt you'll be back for lots of things and conversations.
Oh my gosh, amazing. I am so honored to be on. I really appreciate both of you. I love dancing. I love research. So this is just so fun for me to get to talk about. So I really appreciate.
Thanks for joining us in this episode of the New View podcast. We hope you enjoyed.
If you have any ideas about future guests we should interview or want to connect, you can find us on Instagram at newview.collective or email us at newviewcollective.mm@gmail.com.